What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Thoughts Unchained Podcast. My name is Armaan. I'm your host, and in today's episode, I'm joined today by two of my buddies, my guests, Arjun and Sahej. How are you guys doing today?
I'm doing good.
Doing good.
Yeah.
Thank you for inviting us.
Yeah.
Yeah, no worries. Glad to have you on the podcast. And in today's episode, we're going to talk about a few different topics. The first one that we want to get into is related to languages and the misconceptions that can come with it, especially if you're of an ethnic group and you don't speak your mother tongue, especially if you live in the diaspora of another country, for example, and sort of the beliefs and the judgments that can surround that. We'll also go into a bit of like our mindset and our mentality later on in the podcast if we have some time for that. But first and foremost, I wanted to ask you two, how have you guys been doing lately? Because we're just at the start of a new year. We just finished winter break. What have you guys been up to recently?
So
Maybe,
I've been doing pretty well. Started the new year pretty good, hopefully. Nothing really. I mean, I just kind of it feels like kind of the same old, right? It's just kind of time passing. Obviously it's New Year, so I'm gonna try implementing like some New Year's resolutions, but we'll see how those go.
Yeah, I didn't really
Yeah.
feel like the new year. I was just thinking of going back to school and just more involved around that.
Yeah. Just
Right, yeah.
just getting like kind of hyped up for like mentally change, like okay, finally I got work to do now. I'm gonna
Right.
focus, stuff like that.
Right, yeah. I see what you mean. I feel like once I go on break from school, I'll just like fully crash. And then it's so hard to pick yourself up after. You're like, wait, I have work? Like
Yeah.
that exists still?
Yeah,
Like,
dude. The freaking slump when I first so the first few days of break were like really good, and then after that it's just like nothing to do. I get so bored.
I was kind of hoping, I was just waiting for when school was starting again. I was like, and to get out of the
Yeah.
house more.
Yeah, man. Like, the thing was all like I couldn't even go outside that often because of the like cold weather,
Yeah.
right? So it's like a bunch of plans got canceled and stuff like that, which sucks.
yeah, facts. That happened to me too because of like the cold weather. I had some more plans that I was gonna try and make with like some like high school friends, like just to meet up again, but a bunch of stuff got canceled because of the snow. Yeah.
One thing actually that came out during the break that I was really hyped about was the World Cup. Like I don't know if did you guys watch it?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah, I did.
Every
yeah,
morning.
every more dude. That freaking Argentina versus France game. I invited a bunch of friends over like in the morning. We all came in my house at, like we all came. They
Oh,
all
no
came
way.
over at like 5:30 in the morning, or no 6:30 in the morning, just to like set up and everything. Yeah, that was that was really
Yeah. I think I had
Nerve-wracking.
2 hours of sleep that night. And then
damn.
yeah, I think it started around 7 or 8, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I slept around 5:30 and then
No, it started on 7. It started at 7.
Yeah, and then my dad came and he actually woke me up. He goes, I think I woke up around the 60th minute.
W Daddy Road.
Yeah.
That's a
Just in time, just in
Bro.
time.
So you fell asleep at 5:30 that morning?
Yeah, it was bad. My sleep schedule was really messed up over the break.
Oh, that's tough, especially for the World Cup.
Yeah.
No, I think that game took some years off my life. I'm not
Yeah,
gonna lie.
dude, it
was
did, bro.
fun, though.
I'm not even gonna lie. Like, I was so nervous. I resigned I just turned off my emotions, dude. Like halfway into the game, because I was voting for Argentina, right?
Yeah.
The second half, like around the 70th minute, they subbed off Di Maria and they started playing really they're playing really bad. Okay, I'll be honest. And
Yeah.
I was like, my heartbeat was like over 100%. Like it was just beating like it was so nervous, and I was like, screw it, I'm just not gonna think about it. I just like, okay, they lost. I just mentally prepared myself because because Mbappe had just scored 2 goals.
He just turned
in
on
a
God
minute.
mode, yeah.
No, he
Yeah,
got
like-
okay, the first one is a penalty. He scored 2 out of his 3 goals were penalties. So
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that was crazy. I feel like it was definitely worthwhile though. Like I think
if you were
Um,
like a neutral watcher, it's probably a really good game.
if you were neutral, yeah, like I mean, Mbappe's probably like my favorite player, but yeah, I was still rooting for Argentina because like France already won last time, right?
Mhm.
I wanted Messi to win.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It was weird. It was crazy. Like they just decided to make it a game in like the 80th, 85th minute or something.
Yeah.
But yeah,
That was.
that was crazy. I think this is a good time to segue into our first topic of the podcast, which is sort of about language. And so for context, all three of us are like Punjabi, living like in like North America.
Yep.
And we have some similar I guess backgrounds as far as like we didn't have the same like I guess maybe traditional experience that maybe a lot of our peers had. So I was curious to know, and maybe we can start with Arjun and then Sahej. Like, how was your guys' I guess linguistic experience as far as like what languages you speak in what context? Yeah, just whatever you feel like comfortable sharing.
Okay, so for me, I'm a bilingual, right? I speak Punjabi and English. I speak English predominantly, like most of the time, because just the country that we live in. Another thing about me is that I tend, like, even though, like, I'm bilingual, right? Like, so by I mean, I can pretty fluently speak Punjabi. I am a bit slow at reading and writing due to my lack of practice. So a couple years ago, if we were to go back like maybe like 4 or 5 years ago, I probably would have been more fluent because I was speaking it much more often as I just recently made a trip to India. So I spent like a month there and I came out like really fluent. Like at first I had like cousins and stuff. They were like, oh, he kind of broke in Punjabi, right? But after that, it's like after like a week, I was like really quick to getting it. So I was just I actually have a question for you guys. When you get like when you go to India or go to a place that you're predominantly speaking Punjabi, do you guys just kind of pick it up really quickly?
I mean,
if you were to,
I'd never even like went to India. Not really. Like I went when I was maybe like 1 year old, and
oh damn.
other than that,
Wow.
I've never really went back.
What about you, Armaan?
Yeah, I actually also haven't been to India before, which is probably crazy.
Really?
So yeah, I know that's probably kind of mind blowing, and maybe that's another mind blowing thing for some people who are listening. Like if you're like, say you're Punjabi, yeah, that's sort of how my experience is. But I guess I'll try and like explain what like my response would be like kind of in the area that we live because it's like very predominantly Punjabi. I guess like maybe if I'm like in an environment where it's like everyone's speaking Punjabi, or like maybe this could apply to you, the listener, like whatever mother tongue language that you speak, if you speak something other than English or like your family does. But for me, I guess so. I guess like you kind of have to, you get more used to like when you're in a rhythm, like your brain kind of has to use that language a bit more. Like, I'm still very preliminary like into psychology, but I guess it probably has to do with like your neural network of that like particular language. But yeah. Arjun, did you want to continue, or Sahej, did you want to talk about your experience?
Yeah, Arjun, do you have anything to
Sahej,
add?
if you want. Wait, I just wanted to say, when I went to India when I went to India like a couple years ago, it felt really weird because I know all these words, right? Like even now, I still remember the words. It's just that like my ability to recall them in the instant, like to let's say translate. Because like the way I think in English. Like when I have thoughts in my head, they're in English, and so I kind of translate it into Punjabi and then speak it. I don't know if you guys have the same experience, but for me, I sometimes forget what words are like kind of translate over. Like if I'm saying something like I'm talking to my mom, right, and she speaks Punjabi predominantly. If I speak to her I have to speak to her in Punjabi. So what I do is I just kind of have my thoughts in English, and and just immediately translate it. But I sometimes forget what certain words mean, right? So I have like a moment where I just like kind of panic and I just speak it, like I just speak the English version, right? So it results in me having a kind of a broken Punjabi. So when I went to India though, it got fixed in like a week because I was forced to constantly be like recalling information. So it's like kind of like the way you were talking about, like my brain probably just got used to it, right? And I thought that was really weird. Like I thought it was really cool too, where I just completely like switched. So it's like I have faith now. It's like, oh, if I have to, I can, you know.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yes. What about you, Sahej?
Yeah, so like for my first like few years of my life, I did go to like a religious school where Punjabi was being taught like every second day, and up until like grade 5 or 6, that is what I was like. I was pretty fluent in it. Like I could read, I could write, and speak properly, like at home and at school. But I moved to like a public school in grade 6, and after that, like you were mentioning how you get into like a rhythm of speaking a different language, and that you just become more used to that. So I started speaking like a lot more English, and yeah, just like Arjun, like I started mixing up English and Punjabi at times, and like I'm like speaking words like in Punjabi, but then like my English just kicks in, and
When you get panicked, right? Or,
yeah, and I just say like the English version of the word.
yeah, I know.
And then yeah, since then I'm
Yeah.
like I've forgotten to like read. I can't read or write it anymore, and I'm just like trying to work on my speaking part mostly now. Yeah.
Armaan, what
Yeah,
about
that
you?
makes sense. For me, I didn't really speak a ton of Punjabi when I was younger because like I'm born to like two first generation like citizens of where we live. Like like my grandparents were the ones who immigrated from Punjab. And so, and I actually didn't live with my grandparents for like the majority of like my first few years of my life until really like high school. And then like once I got to like my high school, because like the area that I live in is like it's very predominantly Punjabi. Like the elementary school I went to was a lot of Punjabi kids, and even my high school was largely maybe like 90% Punjabi. And when I was in like grade 8 and like grade 9, I remember I used to feel like I used to almost feel like embarrassed or left out. Because like it's not even like reading or writing wise. It's like, I mean, my parents did a really good job of teaching me about like culture and stuff like that. It's just it wasn't natural for them to speak to each other in Punjabi. So as a result, like I mainly picked up the understanding I had from like when I would visit family members and stuff, right? Or like when I would like visit my grandparents. But then once like my grandmother started living with my family, and like once I really tried to like practice more, I even like asked my parents if they could help me practice my Punjabi more. And I became a better speaker, and I started just trying to do stuff like watching Punjabi movies, listening to Punjabi songs, like try and get as much immersion as I could. Because I think Arjun, when you said you went to India, like it was immersion pretty much.
Yeah. It
Like
was-
you had no choice. Like your brain had to recall that info. It's like active recall. It's kind of like when you're studying, people are like, just don't read a textbook. Like use flashcards, test yourself, right? Because you have to force yourself to really, like there's no like, oh, look at the back of the textbook for the answer. You have to try and recall it, right?
Yeah.
I guess it's like when you have to recall it. And then also for me, I feel like I did go to public high school, but like because of the Punjabi population, there's actually some good like Punjabi classes and teachers who are really supportive. So for me, I actually learned through that as well, a bit of reading and writing. But my peak, like I would have been most confident maybe like a year or two ago. Now I haven't actually used I haven't written in a long time, like since I got out of high school, I haven't read. So it's like, I finally got around to a point where I felt like I was fluent in the last like maybe year or two. But still now I'm at a point where I'm kind of rusty as well. It's like I haven't used it in a while, right? And so that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's like your ability to speak and write is just like it's inhibited, right? It's like it feels like it's slower than it should be. It's basically what
Yeah.
I mean. You just feel
Like
rusty.
you know how you mentioned like recalling words, right? Like when I was like when I had this wave of motivation, I'm like, oh, I had this like hunger to like learn, like and I told myself, oh, I'm not just gonna reach a point where I'm fluent and like, oh, whatever, because I know what it's like to not know how to speak. I want to be able to speak it really really well, and I want to be able to like kind of carry it on to like future like younger kids, right? And be the person who teaches others. But I kind of lost that like motivation, and so now I don't recall stuff on the ball as well. So it's like, oh, like a word, whereas like I would remember that word on the ball when I was like speaking it more frequently. Now it takes me a while. Like even even sometimes now when I'm speaking to like my grandmother, because the interesting thing is my grandmother like also she knows English because she moved here like several decades ago, but like she predominantly speaks Punjabi, but sometimes I can still respond to her in English, right?
Mm-hmm.
Versus like, you know, if you're speaking to someone who only speaks in Punjabi, there is no evading like speaking or like whatever your mother tongue is. There's no evading it because it's like that's the only mode of communication, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was, like
I guess that's it. Yeah.
yeah, but very like similar experience. Like in terms of like lack of practice, I like no one really speaks in my home as well anymore. Yeah, my grandma also like came here like decades ago, so it's like if I'm not speaking it or hearing it every day like at home, it's hard to just like keep up with it. Like yeah, you can like watch movies and like hear songs like in that language, or even like talk to like other people outside your house, but it's really important with like any language, to be honest, to always be like keeping up with it. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think an interesting thing that I've kind of found is like the feeling of maybe not being the most confident in the language that we speak. It's maybe more common than we think. I think it's just sometimes like even people who may have like a more, I don't know, traditional household that they grew up in, maybe even though they know how to speak the language fluently, maybe they still have confusion about like their culture, or maybe they also feel like kind of confused. It's just maybe not everyone feels comfortable to speak out about it, because like I know for me, like I'm not gonna act like it happened all the time, but like sometimes people would like kind of make fun of me, right? I'm not sure if that's happened to you guys, or like they would kind of be like, oh, why don't you speak this language or something like that. Have you ever dealt with that before, like people wondering like, oh,
Yep.
why don't you
I've
speak
dealt with that a lot, like in high school. Not really in my elementary, because there weren't a lot of like chubby kids there. But in high school, maybe like 50% of like my grade was Punjabi or like from South Asia. So, and a lot of the times they would be actually speaking in Punjabi to each other. And yeah, you do like hear, you know, like when people say that, oh, you know, you should be able to speak this, or it's like you're
Like you
Punjabi,
can
but you
call,
can't
like-
hear it. Yeah.
Yeah, like getting like what called whitewash, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I was actually gonna bring up that term because I know like yeah, like how have you guys felt if you've ever heard that word before? Like how did it make you feel, if you feel okay talking about that?
Sahej, you wanna go first?
Yeah, sure. I have like, yeah, I've heard it a lot of times. Like usually it didn't used to like affect me before, but then you start thinking about it, like am I really whitewashed? But
Insecurity.
exactly.
Yeah.
But I think people just have to realize like your culture is not only your language, right? There's also like just like celebrating events, and it's not just the language that allows you to be incorporated into a culture. And so like, even if you're like not like 100% fluent in Punjabi, like even if you just are able to like understand or just speak it a little bit, that doesn't make you whitewashed by any way.
Actually, my parents are actually, this is actually a really big thing that like we talk about.
Mm-hmm.
It's because like what they're worried about is they don't want like for example, the next generation, right? Like would be like, pretend if I were to have kids in the future, they don't want them to not be able to speak Punjabi. Like that's what they're scared of. They're like, I don't want, you know, your kids to not be able to like the culture, because like even though we say that, like, okay, I agree with you that language is not the only thing that
Mm-hmm.
revolves around the culture. It's obviously the events, the traditions, and stuff like that. But I would say that language is a very big part of culture, I feel like, in terms of just to be able to stay alive, kind of. Because if you start killing off language, right? Like if we don't pass it on,
Mm-hmm.
it's the culture will slowly die out as well as it becomes more, as we become more accustomed to stuff like where we live, right? So due to proximity, I feel like we're inadvertently kind of accept, like we're in that culture, right? Like let's say North America, right? We start celebrating the holidays that are celebrated here. We start slowly moving away from, let's say, like kind of our origin, right?
Yeah.
If you were to say that. And so like even though this is kind of like, even though it's not directly like I don't have kids, right? I'm freaking young, but the thing is it's actually
Yeah.
shown like this, that their fear is like grounded in reality, because you can see it my sister, like in my, like I have a sibling, I have a sister. You can see it in her, kind of, because when I was growing up, like when I was younger, like so she's a couple years younger than me, right? I'm actually better at reading and writing and speaking Punjabi than her, and I think it's partially due to the fact that when I was younger, I would learn English from so let's say preschool, right? I would start speaking English there, and my dad was speaking English to me, so I started just responding to things like I started learning English faster, and I started talking to my sister in English, like not in Punjabi though, and.
Right.
And since me and her spent a lot of time together, I think that kind of rubbed off on her. So she never got that much practice as much as I did when I was growing up, right? And so her Punjabi is like much worse than mine, and I only talk to her in English basically. Like it's so I was just, what this is basically trying to say is that like it is true. Like this will happen if we were not to, let's say, put in more effort. Like if I were not to put more effort, or if she's not putting more effort into actually learning and writing, learning the language, right?
Yeah, like what you said about, you know, your younger sibling, like, because she spent so much time with you, like, her English is, you know, a lot better than her Punjabi. Like, I definitely agree with that because, like, I'm like the younger sibling here, and spending a lot of time with my sister, like, she's really good at Punjabi, but I'm not that good, like, in comparison to her. And that is a lot because, you know, she just, like, spend a lot of time with me, and she used to only speak to me in English, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I get what you mean, and that that's kind of true. That sometimes, like, I think that's an interesting thing in general, like in any aspect of life, like the sort of things that like the oldest sibling has to sort of learn and go through, and the experiences they have, and how like by the time the second sibling is born, you know, like they almost pick up stuff from their sibling. Like there's another variable affecting how they grow up, and that's the older sibling, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, whereas it was just the parents for the oldest kid, right? Mm-hmm. So I get that, and like what you were saying, Arjun, about how like I almost feel like the language is it kind of acts like a barrier to the culture.
Mm-hmm.
In some cases, like certain aspects of the culture, like for me, I personally found like once you learn the language, like more aspects of the culture open up and things you can understand. Even simple stuff like, well, if you're listening to music or whatever, like, yeah, like I used to listen to Punjabi music before I was like maybe when I was trying to get into like learning Punjabi, and like I found the songs to be cool, but I guess it's like once you understand the lyrics, kind of makes a difference as well, right? Or like if you're watching a movie or something, like versus, you know, when you watch with subtitles and they like say Punjabi is a language with many like I guess idioms or like sayings, right?
Yeah, and they can't
That,
translate.
like you can't translate it. It doesn't do justice, and then you hear it in Punjabi and it's like, oh, that's what they meant. They weren't like, oh, you know, like some translated weird sentence. It's like I can't even think of an example right now.
Yeah, but
it's
like
oh,
you definitely, I definitely get that. Like, just you read something, you're like, nope, that's not what that means.
yeah, but
Like,
you know what yeah. I think as far as what you were saying about like the next generation, or like wondering if when we like our generation has kids, whatever, and like passing down the language, I think something is like maybe when some people might be confused and they're like, oh, like you're Punjabi, you're South Asian, whatever your ethnicity may be, like how do you not speak Punjabi, right? I think a thing to consider is like maybe many people who like many of our peers who this generation have like parents who immigrated to like another country and now they're the first generation kids, right? Or like I'm not sure, are you two like first generation?
yeah,
or
I'm first generation. My parents are both immigrants.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm first as well. But my dad, like I think he moved to Alberta when he was like around 4 or 5 years old. So
okay.
So he did have like that. He did
So
kind of
grew
have
up
like a
here?
first generation experience. Yeah, he did. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like the thing is that our peers who are like first generation now, they may experience a similar feeling because it's like, oh, you know, like say they get married to someone who's from here who's also like a first generation Punjabi, they might end up speaking to each other in English naturally. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like they might try to speak to their kid in Punjabi, but like maybe like when they are talking to their little kid, they're like, oh, like, you know, like do this or whatever in Punjabi, but they're gonna talk to their spouse in English or something, right? And that's kind of how like that's the scenario of my parents. I think they said they tried a lot to speak to me and my sister in Punjabi when they were younger, but they grew up in like, you know, the Western world and spoke English. So I feel like maybe our generation might face that too, where it's like, if they may be confused about, some people might be confused about how like a situation like that might occur, like with us where we spoke more English. But I think that's something that people are about to realize, is that like it's kind of hard when you, like, you know how we mentioned, oh, we think in English, right? Like even people who grew up speaking Punjabi predominantly at home, I think a lot of our peers now, they might think in English even though Punjabi is their first language, right? So it's like when you think in a language, when you predominantly speak it with your peers, it's like something you have to be really conscious of as well, right? Like if you want to preserve the language, like Arjun said,
Yeah.
it's a really big effort to make.
There's actually that point of you in your, like, in the future, like if you're for both first generation, you're most likely to speak in English. I think that's a good thing that many people haven't actually thought about. They're like, it's some of the things that you don't really think about. You're like, oh, okay, well, we'll speak to our child in our native language and we'll make sure the language survives. But the thing is, the baby or whatever, like the kid, right? It'll learn off of what you do most frequently. So if you're frequently
Right.
speaking each other in English, it's gonna pick up the English. If you frequently speak to each other, and like it doesn't matter if you're talking to like the child directly. It doesn't really matter. It's about how what they observe you doing. Because I think it was I forget the
Right.
age, but like the first few years of their life, like babies, they're only kind of like observing. They just copy whatever they see from what their parents are doing.
Yeah.
And so
Right.
that's actually like a really good point about that. It's like not many people think of that. Like you would have to put such an effort in where you would have to completely change the way you interact, basically, right? You'd have to
Right,
switch
yeah,
them.
like, I've read about this before out of curiosity, like, kind of when I was trying to learn Punjabi, and I realized, like, I believe it's between 12, like, exactly a year, like 12 months to about 3 years is the optimal time for a baby to, like, learn how to speak. Because, like, typically, right, unless you have, like, a really, like, prodigious, like, smart, like, baby who's just developmentally ahead, they're probably going to start speaking around a year, right? Or, like, 13 months or something. I don't know, maybe 11 months. Around, I could be wrong, I'm going to sound so stupid. Isn't it, like, around the time they start to walk, they start to talk or something?
I don't know. I'm not sure about that so much to say.
But yeah, probably shouldn't. But what I do know is between 1 to 3 years, like on the dot, 12 months to 3 years is when they are best at learning languages. And it's like, that's actually like, yeah, that's interesting to think about. It's like you do have to sort of like if you're gonna like, say decide with your partner, like we're gonna teach our kid like our mother tongue, even though we grew up speaking like English, right? I guess you kind of have to get used to speaking to each other, because like like Arjun said, like, yeah, you could tell the kid like, oh, like, come eat food, like it's time for you to go to sleep, whatever, right? But like, yeah, like 70-80% of the stuff that they hear, it's gonna be like, like they're just gonna hear you talking to your significant other or whatever. You're gonna be like, oh, hey, like whatever, like talking about work, talking about like, oh, you gotta get groceries or whatever, and you're gonna talk in English and they're gonna pick up on that, right? And it's like, I think that's actually a good point you brought up. It's like children will pick up on whatever they most frequently hear, right?
Yeah, that's a really good, like, I think it's kind of, it's a unique way of thinking about it. Like, I never really thought of it that way, but I'm gonna have to keep that in the back of my mind now.
Yeah, but I think like
Such a good-
I think like a fear that first generation like also might have is that by the time like they do become like parents, like how good will their language, like will their like Punjabi or whatever language they're trying to teach their kids, like how good will that be so that they can properly and like efficiently teach it to the child? Because I feel like depending on like where you're speaking right now, if you're speaking like English mostly, like in 10 years, how good is your Punjabi gonna be, right? So you can like pass it on.
That is.
Because I feel like
That is actually.
for me, like it's really like gone down, like my Punjabi skills. So it's like how much of that will I even have left by the time I have kids?
Right. Yeah, it's actually a good point too. Yeah.
It's like because it's constantly degrading, right? Unless you put an active effort.
Yeah.
I feel like you have to be in an environment where you're constantly speaking in order for it to be in order to actually retain it, right? Like you just lose it's like a muscle. Like you have to keep on exercising in order for it to maintain its shape over the long term, right? And either grow or or it'll just contract. Or not contract. The right word would be.
Yeah, that's.
I don't know the right word.
Yeah.
It's great. It's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's true actually. Because like when you get older, like say like where we live, it's like really predominantly Punjabi, right? But even if we start like even the school that we go to now, it's like kind of like the metropolitan area around, right? So it's not just our one city. It's like you're gonna start interacting with people of different cultures too, right? And then as you go into like as you get older, you go to uni, you go to like work, into your career. You're not gonna only interact with people of your cultures, even if you live in a neighborhood that's predominantly of your ethnic group, right?
That is.
So that's actually a good point, Sahej. Like if you're like being scared that your Punjabi might not, or your native language might not actually be great in the first place to be able to pass down. Like wondering and worrying if your quality of your mother tongue is actually strong enough to pass down to it, like your children, right?
Yeah, because you feel like, to teach someone else, like, you have to know it yourself. And I feel like if I want to be able to teach my kids, like, I'm like, I have to, like, learn it all over again, because it's really, like, not perfect right now. So, yeah.
I mean, then if you go another step further, let's say that, like, even let's say you try your hardest, you do it, and then they grow up a bit more. They go to an English school. They're gonna like 90%. So that's like, out of 8 hours out of their, well, let's say you stay awake for like 16 hours a day, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's fair. They get 8 hours of sleep. 8 hours of that 16 they're spending at school, where they're gonna speak English and they're gonna be taught grammar and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Right? They're not gonna like, they don't get the option to like kind of learn, let's say Punjabi. Let's say you wanna put your kid into a Punjabi school. The teachers there might not be that great. They might not teach it correctly. They might just make it so then they might teach it like in a bad way where your kid just doesn't want to do it, right? Like, so if let's say a personal example, I went to like, I guess you can say religious school, and they taught Punjabi there. They, not to say anything bad against the teachers, I personally just didn't like the way in which they taught. Like, they put like pressure in the wrong areas. Like, I just didn't like it at all, and that made me more adverse to actually going out on my own and actually trying to learn it. Like, it kind of made me more stubborn. Like, it's a bad way of thinking, but it's like, okay, I became stubborn. I'm like, you know what? Like, it's like kind of out of spite. It's like, I'm not gonna learn it just because I've had really bad experience with it, right? And it's just something that to think about as well. Like, even if you do send your kid to, let's say, a Punjabi school, like I went there for like a long time. I went there for like a lot of years, and even now I'm like barely passable in terms of my reading and writing and speaking, right? Yeah. So it's like, what do you do then, right?
Yeah. I think a misconception a lot of people have is, oh, I was in this environment, so I'm good at this thing, or like they're like, oh, I grew up in such a, like, I don't want to generalize, right? Mm-hmm. But some people may think, oh, like, there's a certain amount of people, I guess, in any facet of life who may feel that they have superiority or something. Some people will feel like, oh, I grew up in a really traditional household, so I'm so good at it, like Punjabi, even though like maybe deep down they may feel like, oh, like I'm a little bit worried, like what if, like as they've gotten older, they're like, oh, I'm starting to think in English, I'm starting to speak more English, I'm kind of losing touch with my language and my culture. Or some people will think, oh, I went to this school where they taught this language, therefore I feel superior to like other people or whatever, right? But I guess a big thing is also like, like, do you wanna like really retain it? Like, do you have the desire to like learn more or to keep that up, right?
Yeah, I do have,
especially if it's not.
Yeah,
well, you can go.
I do have like some experience with that, like what you said, Armaan, because coming out of like a religious school and then going into like a public school, I knew Punjabi like fluently. I could read and write it, but then later on, like, I started thinking in English, and I started like only interacting with people that only spoke English, and then I did have like a lot of fears, like, am I forgetting it? But then there came a point where like, I did end up forgetting it. I couldn't retain it anymore. One, it became like too confusing, and it's also like time consuming if you're not actively speaking it at home, and then you're not going to like a school where it's spoken. So if I'm like speaking English, like 16 hours of the day, then there's just like no way for me to like retain Punjabi at all.
Yeah, I actually wanted to build onto Arjun's thing where he was like, out of 16 hours in a day, you're 8 hours you're at school, right? Let's think about that. Like, also, like, if you're a little kid, you're gonna sleep probably more than 8 hours a day. You might sleep 9, who knows, maybe 10. Depends, right? So that's even less time. You might be awake for 14 or 15 hours. Say you're at school for 8 hours, right? Sometimes you might be there for an after school program, or who knows, maybe you play soccer, maybe you like you're a little kid, right? Like not like where you would be like a teenager and you're working, right? That's another thing. If you're a teenager, you might have work, you might be in a club or something, right? That's more time when you might be like extracurriculars and stuff where you're just hanging out with your friends at the park after school, like I did sometimes. Like near that could be even more than just the 8 hours of school, right? And then like especially nowadays, as we, like when you also think about it, like as we're in this generation, right? Like the generation like after us, like say like our generation's kids, right? They're gonna be like playing video games on like, you know how we play on like, I don't know, PS4, PS5 or Xbox or whatever, right? Probably like talking to their friends after school and stuff. They may spend a lot of time interacting with their friends in English, right? So it's even more than the 8 hours. It might be closer to like 10, 12 hours a day, conceivably. That like, and then when you consider
like all the media, all the media they consume, like movies, television, stuff like that. If you pretend you don't get introduced to Punjabi movies, or your parents, let's say, they don't like them, they don't show them to you, they don't listen to Punjabi music, you're just basically one by one, like out of every avenue that you could possibly learn it from, slowly getting shifted out. Which is something to think about as well. It's like, I mean, there is a lot of like, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of good Punjabi like media out there. It's just, it's not very, I think, as much as diverse, really. Like, you know what I mean? Which causes it to be more like, if you like that certain type of movie, then you're good. But if you don't like those type of movies, then you're like, okay, now what do I do? Because it's very different, right? Yeah. Like from like media that you get here versus media there, it's like a very big, like, it's kind of like a whiplash. Like it's very like different.
Yeah, I think for us, it wasn't really like advertised as well, right? Like Punjabi movies or Punjabi songs. Like growing up, like, you know, even in school, like we were watching. If we were to watch a movie in school, like we were gonna watch an English movie, right? And like Punjabi music and Punjabi movies, like they were just like hard to find as children. So it really depends on like the media that you're being introduced to.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, that's a good point. It's like, we don't know, like, it wasn't really advertised. It's like, unless your parents took a special interest in it, you wouldn't probably get exposed to it as much.
Yeah, I guess it's like even now, like you'll see like prevalent, like say Punjabi singers, like even people who aren't Punjabi, they kind of listen to it because some of them are becoming kind of like global figures, you know, like a lot more popular. Yeah, like before he passed, or like Diljit Dosanjh. Like now you see him in like, what was it? Like he was in some like men's fashion magazine shoot or something like that.
Oh really?
Yeah, it was like, I can't remember it. Not GQ. I think he said that in a song or something. But like, basically, like it's a lot of more figures becoming. Maybe it was a thought that it wasn't cool as well to like follow your own culture, but then when you see your culture kind of becoming more prevalent, I think another thing though is like, oh man, I had a good point and I'm trying to think about it now.
That's okay. You forgot it. It's fine.
It was, oh my god, great. Now I'm annoyed. Do you guys have anything to add?
Arjun, you have anything?
Do you? No, I have nothing.
Yeah, you're talking about how like Diljit Dosanjh and how you start thinking, maybe my culture's like a bit cool and stuff. Yeah, they also like collaborating with, English singers and all that. And if you think about it, like, then it just becomes more mainstream, and then it kind of makes you want to actually like immerse yourself into that culture. If you see that, it's not only Punjabi people listen to Punjabi singers, also like it's more mainstream now.
It's like expression, right? It's like if something is more popular, you feel more comfortable doing it, right? Because
it's like a natural tendency.
Yeah, it's like a natural tendency to be like kind of more similar to everyone, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the thing. I feel like it's also like FOMO. I think FOMO was a big thing for me too. It's like, in elementary school, I didn't really notice people as much like being into like Punjabi music and stuff. But when I came to high school, it's like, I saw people talking about like, it's like sharing Punjabi memes and stuff on like Instagram, like, and that's actually another interesting thing. It's like, like a lot, like sure, a lot of the memes seemed really funny. I was like, I wish that I could really feel like I may never really be able to relate to them in the same way others can, just because of I didn't have that type of upbringing. But I could kind of understand the cultural aspects, or like the funny, like, humor, not like the relatable aspect, but more the arts and the media of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But for me, I feel like sometimes actually, like one thing that I don't know if maybe a lot of people think about this is like for me, I feel like sometimes those memes, they don't always represent people like us in the best way. And what I mean by that is like, you know, they'll use this terminology a lot, like, oh, like when my whitewashed cousin says like, oh,
Oh,
like misspeaks a word, and then everyone's like, haha, so funny, and
Yeah.
I'm here like, wait, I've been that kid before, and it
Yeah.
doesn't feel good at all, you know? It's like, you know what I mean?
It's a very popular thing actually in our culture. I think where it's like shaming people into like doing certain things. Like I mean, I don't some things it's okay in, but like others it's like it's discouraging, right? It really depends on the type of person I feel like you are as well. Like if someone makes fun of you, obviously you're gonna be less inclined to do the same thing again, right? You're gonna be like, okay, well I got punished for doing this, so I won't do it again. And then you just like it'll slowly like adds another reason why to not speak Punjabi, right? And in our culture that happens a lot, I feel like, especially like cousins and stuff like that. Where it's like you're just like kind of
Yeah.
I don't know the right word, like kind of like dissing. Like it's not really dissing. It's like more like roasting each other for fun. Like it's supposed to be in a friendly manner, but sometimes people like if it's like a sore spot for you, and then you get like roasted, that it kind of hurts. And so it's something to keep in mind as well. I think in the culture, the way we perceive like language and the way we kind of like encourage it is also not necessarily the best way either, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think with like, Armaan, what you're saying, like with social media and like these memes and stuff, when you do see the stuff, like yeah, you do feel like you're missing out on a lot of the stuff. One, because sometimes you can't understand it, and like, two, like it can be directed at you, and then when you realize that, you're like maybe I should try getting back into like Punjabi and stuff. But yeah, like with like social media and stuff, it's you kind of see like maybe like you are not part of like a big part of your culture, like you're missing out on a lot of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I think what Arjun mentioned is actually like a really good connection to another topic we had in mind, which is like your mindset and your mentality around certain things. And like I guess it does like there is kind of like one of two ways that you can go about it, because there's always gonna be people who just don't like maybe understand where you're coming from or understand your worldview. Sometimes it's ignorance, sometimes they just genuinely don't know, and like they might not know any better. Sometimes they're not trying to be that way, like you said, like they're trying to make a funny joke or like a playful joke, and they might not know, oh, like that's actually something that hit home for you, right, in the worst way.
It's like
But,
unexpected.
yeah. Yeah, did you want to elaborate on that?
Oh, like so if someone, I just meant like so it's like pretend we're just sitting and like we'll be sitting here, right? And when someone else like I'll give a personal example. I'll like misspeak something in front of a couple of my cousins. They like if they're like I have a couple cousins, so I have. Okay, let's just say they speak really good Punjabi, right? Let's say, and I be speaking from he'll come sometimes and be like, yo, you're really good at work on your Punjabi. It's like I'm like, dude, you're so blunt, man. I know that already. But it's like he's like, dude, you really got to work on it. Those people are gonna think you're like whitewash or something. And I'm like, damn, that's kind of true. I should probably work on it. And I was like, the way I take it is like I have to actually try harder to like learn it. But other people might be like, damn, he really just kind of. Maybe next time I'll just speak in English. They probably understand anyways, right? Like.
Yeah.
So, it's just the way you perceive things. Like, I think in general we should be more encouraging. Like, I feel like shaming things. It's not necessarily the. Okay, so, like recently I've noticed that like, you shouldn't shame things to an extreme amount. But I feel like shame has a place in motivation. So like if it's a bad thing that you do, right, and then you get shamed of it, you'll probably stop doing it, right? That's how usually when you shame someone that you do that, right, they just stop. But I feel like recently a lot of people have been taking that shame is on net negative. Like, oh, you'll like so for example, like we're talking about right now, if I get shamed for like saying a wrong word, right, or misspeak, people take it in a way that, oh, that's like a negative thing, right? I'm being shamed because I don't know, and that's discouraging me. But it can also work in the other way as well. Like if you're getting shamed and like if you're getting shamed, it might motivate you. It might push you to be better. Like in certain things, I feel like that's kind of needed, but like in certain things, there's not. Like there's a range in which you can do it. If you do it to an excessive degree, it'll discourage people. But if you do it in the right amount, where it's like just poking fun, it might cause someone to be motivated to do better.
I think that like depends on your mindset a lot, because like there's gonna be some people that respond to that and be like, yeah, maybe I'm gonna work on it and I'm gonna be better the next time I speak it. But I feel like for a lot of people, like I feel like for me as well, it's like a fear, like if I say it again, I'm just gonna get ashamed about it again. So
That's true.
It just depends like on like a personal mindset, right? It's all on like, it's a personal opinion, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess it depends on your mindset. Everyone responds to things in different ways, right?
Yeah.
Part of it is like knowing who you're talking to as well, and how to communicate with that person, right? I think like shame can be like, if we were to apply this to the most extreme elements in society, right? Shame is certainly a way to, say someone does something beyond like reproach, beyond like, or like whatever the word is, like they do something terrible.
They actually do terrible.
It's like, oh,
you
I
need
don't know,
to
like
bullying
act or whatever.
Like
I don't
bully
know.
someone or some shit.
Or yeah, you bully someone, right? It's like, yeah, like sure, there may have been factors that cause you to bully someone or commit a crime or whatever, but at the end of the day, there's certain things that we cannot accept, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, shame may have a place there, or even just like, yeah, you said a mean thing to someone, like at the end of the day, like if there's a group of people there and you can see that person's being hurt, if you want to call it shame, if you want to call it calling out, whatever, sometimes you do have to.
You do have to
like,
actually act on it, right? That's what you're trying to say.
Sometimes, yeah. I guess like I guess like you said, like I don't think shaming someone as far as like, oh, they didn't know their language is like the best way to go about it.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. Maybe it's like they're casting active disrespect upon their culture or something. Like they're actively being like they're trashing,
like
their culture or something. Maybe in that case, I could see shame being applied. I think it's touchy for sure.
Yeah.
But like. Yeah, I can see how that I wouldn't lean that way when it comes to culture. Maybe like just mistreating people in general, but I can see where Arjun's coming from as well, right?
I feel like
What's
in that
you were gonna say?
Yeah, I feel like in that case you also have to like the person who is shaming, like they should also like provide, like a tip, or like tell them how you can improve it. Yeah, right. You can't just like end it at the shaming and be like fix it yourself, right? Like if you shame someone about it,
that's too aggressive,
right? Like you gotta tell them like, be like, start doing this.
Fix yourself, bro. Just
Dude, you got so many problems, bro. You gotta fix yourself. Right?
Exactly.
It's like imagine you walk up to someone like, bro, like I'm gonna keep it straight. I'm gonna keep it a buck, bro. Everyone hates you, bro. Fix your life.
Everyone's just like, like no one has the balls to say it, but I got you, bro.
Like tell the guy like, hey, this is how you cannot make someone hate you. Right?
Oh my god. That's like
so something on those lines.
That's the worst thing.
Oh, that's why you're even worse, yeah.
Yeah, no, but you were saying?
Yeah, just like providing like more context in terms of that, right? Just like actually giving them tips and helping them out a little bit. If you do see someone like that needs help with like their language or something, just like tell them, right? Because it's just gonna improve them.
Hey everyone, this is just a post-recording note. This episode ended up running about an hour and 40 minutes long in terms of how long it took to record it. So this episode will have been split up into two parts by the time you're listening to it. You'll have just listened to part one. We decided to cut this episode halfway through because it ended up going in a different direction as far as the conversation. So you can expect to hear that episode in the next installment of the podcast. But thank you for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. I would really appreciate if you could leave a rating if you're listening to the podcast on any of its directories, such as Spotify or Apple Music. Be sure to check out the podcast at Thoughts Unchained Podcast on Instagram. And until next time, thank you all for watching and keep your head in the clouds.